ABM done wrong is just glorified demand gen. ABM done right helps build long-lasting relationships and really helps contribute to overall business growth.
Welcome to the next episode of Generation Marketing. I'm Gary Coville, and today's topic is ABM. So I'm really pleased to be joined by Robert Weston. Rob is one of our marketing success managers here at Cremarc and a real expert in ABM.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. So since I joined Cremarc, it's been a chance for me to really expand on my ABM knowledge. I joined from a pure play ABM agency, but one of the benefits I found of working at Cremarc is because we do offer marketing solutions across the whole funnel. I've been able to utilize different agency resources to create a cyclical proposition that really helps take our client on a start to finish journey around ABM.
So the first thing, Rob, that I get all the time when I go into organizations is people saying, I want to do ABM. And the first question I ask back is, what is your view of ABM? What's your definition of ABM? And that really varies, right? If you're talking to a sales leader, he goes, right, well, my account managers are focused on these big accounts and I want marketing to put all their effort into focusing and driving those. If you talk to products, it's all about, well, I've got this product that I want to take into this market. So it's a completely different perspective on that. So I'm going to ask the expert, how would you define ABM?
Yeah, so I think what you said is accurate to an extent, and we can touch on that in a minute about the different roles and perspectives of ABM and how they need to contribute to the overall strategy. But in a nutshell, I'd say that ABM is a highly personalised, targeted approach. It does require alignment across the whole business, and it really is a shift in marketing perception and strategy. Now, there's 3 different levels to ABM. There's the one-to-one ABM, which is really, really focused. You put all your eggs in one basket, and that tends to be on an account that you know there's a large opportunity, requires a lot of resource and monetary input. Then you've got your one-to-few, which is essentially where you have clusters, and then you'd have a proposition that would speak to these individual clusters at the account level. This does still require an element of resource, but it is about 15% level of personalization to each of the accounts. And then you have your one-to-many, which is more of your blanket approach, and we would use that to target the 95% bucket, which we'll expand upon in a bit. But I think it's just important to remember the 3 different levels and to remember that it's not a silver bullet.
And that's really, really key. Because I had one client that was so focused on the A bit, the account, that I changed the name. I didn't call it. I called it a North Star program rather than an ABM program, because I had to change their fixation, because it was always about this company. We're going after this company, and clusters. You could have 50, 100 or whatever. It's just segmenting down your total addressable market and treating a segment or a cluster, as you termed it, differently is the best approach, right?
Definitely. And I think when you speak to sales about the accounts that they like to target, because typically, let's be honest, their wages is based on commission, they want to close the highest value accounts. So therefore, when marketing goes to them and say, which accounts would you like us to put into an ABM program? Without really thinking about any intent data or anything behind the company's position to buy, they just automatically put forward the highest value accounts, which isn't necessarily the best approach, and there needs to be research prior to that.
So you talked there about sort of sometimes the sales perspective is wrong. And as I said before, I've seen that many, many times. Also, marketeers get it wrong. So there's this perception sometimes that ABM is more of a campaign rather than a way of thinking.
Definitely. And from a marketing perspective, especially when people engage an agency, as I mentioned earlier, it's sometimes seen that ABM is going to solve all these problems overnight. Their whole business is going to be unified. They're going to be targeting the high value accounts and closing them overnight, which is absolutely not the case. Marketers need to know that there's going to be a lot of heavy lifting on their behalf, and it's not necessarily something that they might have encountered before. So they need to go out and do their research. They need to make sure that they bring sales, product, leadership along on the journey, make sure they keep them informed to the correct level. They don't necessarily need to be involved the whole way through. But with items such as the target account list, the ICP, that needs to be agreed across the business, because if marketing go and tell sales, this is who we're targeting, sales are on the front line every day. They hear those water cooler moments. They know what people are saying. They hear the pains and gains. That should 100% be brought into your initiative.
And often it's the case, though, that ABM doesn't fit every situation. So I've been in organizations where they've got almost a commodity product. So I always think about it, if your product can be personalized to a particular, going back using your term, cluster, then that's where you do ABM. You don't do ABM if you've got a commodity product, probably a low-end product or a product in demand, then traditional marketing is probably a better fit, right?
Completely agree. ABM works best when you have longer sales cycles and you need more hands to be involved. For example, if I'm going to be selling a £100,000 product to a company, there's going to be more than one person typically that signs that off. You have to engage multiple personas, multiple people within the separate business units. And because of that, you need to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row before going out to them. And that's where personalization can really help. In the example that you gave, yes, you can personalize the product, but in alignment with that, you need to personalize everything. You need to research the people, you need to research the business, you need to use current data that's already out there, look at your competitors and make sure that you can pivot from the message that they're offering, and then put out the personalized assets to really engage the correct people.
And that really fits into something that Gabe and I was talking on a previous podcast, where the buy-in cycle is completely changed. Seems to have changed overnight, but it hasn't. It's been changing over the last few years. But two of the main factors in that, the first one is the length of time that buyers are self-serving and therefore researching their own stuff without engaging an organization has significantly increased. And then the second thing, and this has got worse over the last sort of 12 months, is the number of people involved in those buying decisions has increased. And that plays directly into what you've just said in terms of an ABM approach.
I agree that the buying persona isn't as obvious or as linear as maybe it once was. There's many more people involved in the buying process. And as such, you need to have messaging that can relate to them on an individual basis, on the contact level rather than at the account level. We know from previous episodes that the 95%, 5% model exists, but there needs to be a new narrative around how and when you engage each parts of that circle. So by the time prospects have entered the 5% bucket, the chances are it's too late. They've been researching competitors. Other competitors have been engaging them. They already have an idea of their budgets and they're more going towards the deal-based side of their cycle. We need to make sure that we catch them at the transition stage. So at the 95%, we're warming them up. We're putting the correct messaging out that we know relates to them. Whether or not they're ready to buy at that stage is irrelevant, because then when they are ready to buy and we start seeing some more intent-based activity, for example, rather than just downloading a white paper, they're requesting a demo or they're searching quite middle of or bottom of funnel terms, we know that we're then ready to engage them further at this level. So we need to make sure that we pounce on them between the awareness and consideration stage and not just at the consideration stage, because by that point, we probably missed our boat.
Yeah. And the other point to sort of play on that is what I'm seeing is that the instigation of that buying process comes from multiple places now. It's not just a top down, or it's not just a person who's the budget holder. It could come from an end user. It could come from a line of business owner. It could be coming from the CFO. So the ABM approach is to do that surround of all those people and to try and generate sort of excitement, interest, intent from a much broader audience.
And that's why it's so important to do your research and not only to look at buying activity within the account, but also at the individual level. So, for example, a CFO or a CIO, someone at the very senior level may get involved at the last minute, but their day-to-day activities don't consist of scrolling through LinkedIn, being targeted by ads. They're constantly getting cold called.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that we influence the C-suite level -1, the director level, the manager level, so that you've got advocates within the business, so that when a proposition that relates to that business or a challenge arises, you're front of mind. The first thing or a good CIO or a good CFO would do is go and consult his team, right? So if you've already influenced that stage and you've already reached them, job half done at that stage.
Yeah, your name's in the frame.
Right. And that's where we then bring sales in to then come and help close the deal and really, yeah.
So one of the things I often talk to clients about is how you build clusters, because the normal answer is, we want to target financial services, doesn't everybody? But it's not necessarily an industry sector. It's not a company size. You're really looking for characteristics. So I always say it's what organizations have got in common, and that allows you then to resonate with a commonality across those accounts. Would you agree with that?
That's right. And as an agency, that's why the value proposition workshops that we run are so crucial. And that's why we need sales on board with those. So we'll ask them questions in an empathy mapping workshop around the pains and gains of their prospects, because again, they're the ones that are at the forefront each day. They hear the conversations, the challenges. We talk about what keeps them up at night. And to use financial services as an example, a client that I worked with before, they were looking, essentially they offered ratings for certain accounts. And when you get this financial ratings, it then increases your credibility. People come to you and you can see you've got X amount of star ratings, therefore you're more trustworthy, etc. But the accounts that we worked with sales to identify, were very much in separate industries, different sizes, different locations. So that made it quite hard, or would have made it quite hard, to come up with an industry level or top level proposition, which actually worked in our favor. Because upon speaking to the sales teams, we worked out that these companies that they were trying to go after only had one rating. So our proposition was to actually say, well, what's the benefit of these companies having 2 ratings or having one of our ratings? There's your proposition. That is so personalized because it would only apply to a number of accounts, which then means that when everything from your value proposition stems out, the creative, the content, the tactics, the strategy, it's all based around this highly personalized proposition.
Yeah. And it can be chicken and egg, right? You can almost say, right, what's the differentiation of our product? What is the unique advantage of our product? And then you look for organizations that have that need, or vice versa. You look at this, I won't say total addressable market, but a subset of the total addressable market and go, right, what's in common? And then your marketing pitch or your proposition into them plays on what's in common across them.
I think it's really important that when you start an ABM program that you do start with a total account list, because you need to have a set of demographics that at least identifies them as a good fit customer. Maybe not the best fit, and maybe there's going to be some discrepancies, but if you go in with an account list of thousands and thousands, you're going to be there forever trying to make them fit you rather than the other way around.
So we've got our cluster. We know who we're going after. We've identified the different personas in those organizations. How do we engage?
So I think this goes back to our original point of people ABM washing and seeing ABM as a golden bullet, and that only the lightest level of personalization will be classed as ABM. Ads create awareness. They don't necessarily create engagement. It's our job running ABM initiatives to create meaningful interactions within our target audience. So back to your question, we've got our proposition that speaks to each of these accounts. We've done some persona research and some decision-making unit mapping. We know who we're going after. We can't just hit them on LinkedIn. They might not be looking on LinkedIn. They're being targeted by other people on LinkedIn. They might just not like to convert, and they might never have enough trust to click on our ads. So it's important that we use a multi-channel strategy using different platforms such as content syndication platforms. And we want to put out some direct mail that we know will appeal to them because we've done our contact mapping insights prior to this. I think it's important to remember that each time you add an extra channel, you're doubling your chances of them converting because, for example, there might be one person that won't ever click on LinkedIn, but they will reply to an email. They will acknowledge or scan a QR code if you send them something in the mail. Each time that you hit them in a different angle, you're more likely to convert.
And the other bit as well is that continuity, that multiple touch points are linked together. Because I know personally, if I see somebody's ad on LinkedIn, I may not respond to it, but it's in the back of my head. If they come up in a Google search, I'm more likely to click on them. If I then see them at a trade show, all the time, it's adding to that credibility, that trust, that brand awareness. And then if I talk to somebody who's working with me, a colleague, and they've had the same sort of level of engagement, then suddenly you've got this equity built up and this sort of desire to engage or do something, right?
And that right there is a meaningful interaction that we're looking for, or interactions that we're looking for.
Yeah.
I think it's just like, when you search something or you're looking for a new product, you'll type it into Google. 5 minutes later, you're then being targeted on social. Then you're being sent an email. It's annoying, but it works because they're hitting you from every angle. And you think, all right, I didn't engage with on social because I've only just thought about, engaging in this or engaging in this buying journey. But then they email you and then they might give you a call and you think, oh, actually, I've got a bit more information now. They're taking you through that journey themselves. And that's essentially what we're doing with ABM, only hopefully in a less annoying way.
So you made a really good point, Rob, about it being consistency and taking people on a journey. It's not like traditional marketing where you try and find that tagline, that sort of punchy sort of statement where someone goes, yeah, I want a demo or I want to buy something. This is about sort of longevity and consistency.
Definitely. And I think we are looking for that tagline. The difference is we're not putting it in a punchy format, to use your example. That tagline is going to be spelled out across weeks, months, potentially years to create that journey that you touched upon. We really want to make sure that we're not just going in with a hard sell overnight. We're not taking someone downloading an ebook as a conversion. We're seeing it as a meaningful action. So that will go to our reputation metric box. There's 3: reputation, relationships, and revenue. Obviously, we're only at the start at this point. So it's important that once they've taken an interaction, such as downloading an ebook, we then follow up, still following our same tagline or value proposition in an ABM context, but that we make sure that we then build upon that, because if there's no trust established, there's going to be no reputation, thus demand's never going to increase.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And it's as we talked about before, the sales cycle is getting longer, the buying cycle is getting longer. So therefore, you've got to fuel that or feed into that at all the different stages. And we talk about ABM is really a good fit for those enterprise sales. It's got long sales cycles, multiple decision makers, and playing it like chapters of a book rather than a one-off campaign. Oh, let's try another approach, etc. It's connecting that journey.
Definitely. And I think chapters of a book is a good example, but I think it's important to remember that ABM doesn't necessarily have a start and a finish. And that's what we've been working on here at Cremarc, right? We're trying to create a cyclical proposition whereby just because we get to the end of one ABM proposition, for example, we might have been engaging the retail market with a proposition that speaks to increasing your buying time or something like that. We've applied that to one cluster, but what have we learned from that? Let's go around again. Let's go back to our ICP. Is it still relevant? Are our target accounts still the best fit? Are we bringing in the right members of the business? We've already got all our assets and everything together. So yes, we are telling another story, but essentially think of it like a sequel rather than it finishing at the first.
Right. As you always say, right, ABM is not a campaign, it's a program.
Correct. Yeah.
So Rob, one of the challenges I get is I go into organizations and they go, yep, bought into ABM, totally get it. Fantastic. But how do we measure it? And you mentioned the 3 R's before. So how do you tie that in, and how do you measure success of ABM?
Yeah. So the 3 R's, reputation, relationships, and revenue, each have their own individual metrics that align with each of those buckets. So we first need to establish trust, create a reputation within the key target accounts. Once that trust has been established and there's an element of reputation, we can then begin to engage specific contacts within the account. That's the relationship bucket. And once those contacts are advocating for us, we are developing more relationships, our number of contacts within the accounts are growing, we can then turn to the revenue side of things. So some examples going back to the reputation bucket, we would be looking at things like engagement. As a new business to our prospect, we need to establish that trust and credibility. So this really is where the something for nothing approach comes in. We need to be putting out thought leadership content that we know is relevant to the accounts because we've done our research, we've got our value proposition of which all our messaging and content flows from. We're looking for advocates within the business. We need senior people within the business to start turning their heads or engaging in some contact, but it really is that sort of first touch, light engagement. We can't expect any leads overnight, and sales and leadership need to be made aware of that. Once we've got established that reputation, we're going to start looking at the relationship metrics. Those are going to be things such as expanding our number of known contacts within the CRM. Our prospects are taking more meaningful actions, engaging with more middle of funnel content. They might be requesting a lunch and learn, not a sales pitch or anything like that, but just wanting to learn a bit more about the business. Once that's happened, we can then really start to bring in sales and ask them to help us start converting these clients into revenue. So we're looking at things like, is the ABM cycle shortening? Is the pipeline or share of wallet velocity increasing? Those kinds of things, we're really down to the deal-based stage.
So that's a real good point that you said there, Rob, about sort of you've got to think longer term or have a wider view on this. Gabe and I think, talked about on the either the first podcast we did around this sort of short-termism is killing marketing, and this focus on you've got to produce a result in a quarter is making people drive to the bottom of the funnel and actually do the wrong things. That's not generating the right results. They're generating the vanity metrics that you talk about, but they're not generating the results. What I find with ABM, if you do it right and follow some of the things you've been talking around, then your marketing cycle is probably longer because it's more purposeful, and you're driving those moments and movements between the moments. But what happens at the end of that is you're getting a lot better qualified opportunities. The value of those opportunities are a lot greater, and your probability of converting them or closing them is going sort of through the roof because you've done a lot of that selling as part of the ABM process. So we've talked about sort of a lot about clusters, and we talked about mixed channels, going out to multiple people, etc. But there's also another way. We talked about one to many, one to few, one to one. I've seen situations where we flowed things up and down that, and then we've got really, really personal on that one-to-one basis. How do you see that sort of working in most organizations?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that while each of those initiatives can act in isolation, the best approach to ABM is when they work in unison. So we've got a large variance of accounts from normally the same industry, but they might vary in industry. it's tricky to get a very personalized, laser focused proposition. At this stage, it really is a top level proposition that could apply to a lot of accounts. So there's an element of personalization, but it's not necessarily talking directly to the account or to the contact within the account as much as we'd like. So once we've got our one-to-many campaign established, we're putting out some thought leadership material. It's relatively top level. We're going to be constantly checking our engagement metrics. Is there one account that's engaging with our content more than others? Is there one that we know that we can see are taking meaningful actions? Maybe we have an intent tool where they're searching specific topics. Great. Okay. Well, that then qualifies them to be promoted into our 1 to few cluster. Do that 5, 6, 7, up to 15, I think is a good number of accounts within a cluster. Great. Well, let's look for a proposition that speaks to that cluster and then get a little bit more personalized. I think the sweet spot for the 1 to few is about 15 to 20% personalization. So for example, if we had an asset, I don't know, an interactive guide that had a topic that spoke to the value proposition of that cluster, we might like to get the sales representative or account director to do a personalized intro. Yes, they'll have to do it 15 times, but there's that element of personalization where the bulk of it's still the same. And of course, our outreach will be personalized. And then we run that campaign and let it flow. Once it's been running a while, again, we just do the same process again as we did at the 1 to many to 1 to few level. And we really looked for some of those hand raisers. Are they taking meaningful actions? Are they booking meetings now? Great. Okay, well, that then qualifies or justifies us putting more money, more resource, and going all out, eggs in one basket. We're convinced that we can get a deal out of these guys. At that stage, we really research the individuals. I normally say about 5 contacts within the account that we'd like to engage. We would ask sales why we'd like to engage them, what's their current relationship, pains and gains, anything outside work.
Totally. And I think the great thing is this can flow both ways, because I've done it the other way, where for a client, we did a proposition that went into a specific high street bank. And we drilled down, we understood everything about the high street bank, what they were doing, and we had a very specific message. But then when we thought about it, there was a lot of other banks that had very much the same problem. So we then took the specifics off that bank and made it more general, but still specific to banking, and used it. So we're going from 1 to 1 to 1 to few. And likewise, I love what you said there, because I've done this several times, is using both first party and third party data to see where you're getting that engagement, and then escalating those people up and saying, right, okay, from what I've done and what the wider market's done, there's definitely signs of intent. So therefore we'll double down on the effort. And we've even gone one step further, where we've had been going in a tender process. And so we already know this deal, we're already engaged with the deal, but we've actually then used ABM to wrap around that and to influence the influencers on that deal, to increase the probability of winning it.
Definitely. And I think that's actually something we should touch upon before we finish up. We've talked about ABM from the perspective of net new acquisition, but ABM is really great for growing and retaining your existing accounts. So you might have got one deal over the line that took X amount of years. Well, there's your in. You've got advocates within the business. You can really, and this is what a lot of my clients that I work with do, they go and spend a day or two working in their partners' accounts. They hear the things that are being talked about. They can ask them on a personal level, what are your challenges? They can take them out for drinks. Or could you just introduce me to this area of the business? Or have you thought about this? Could this be useful? I think it's important that is to remember it's not a one and done deal, ABM. Once you're in, okay, well, let's grow.
I think we can talk about this topic for hours. The more we talk about things, the more we uncover other opportunities and drill down in different areas. So it's really, really exciting. I'm a huge believer in ABM. Where do you see it going next? What's the future of ABM?
So I think from a more broader perspective, we know that marketing in general, lots of companies are using AI either to create content, to craft messaging, to even in some cases create assets. And I think to an extent that can be helpful, but AI should not replace real relationships. We need to remember that we're still engaging humans. And for that, you need people to craft this messaging, especially when it comes to elements such as social selling. That can be a great tool in leveraging sales to engage contacts at the one-to-one personal level, especially if you've been running those paid ads in the background. So the chances are the prospect knows who you are. They've seen some of your proposition messaging. Okay, great. Well, don't waste that opportunity by putting a generic marketing at email to them. Let's really make sure that we drill down, we do our research on the accounts, and we put a human-led message to engage them.
I think that's a real good point, the human bit and the connection bit, the relationship bit, because we're bombarded with content all the time. Anywhere we go, it's so easy to find content. There's content all over. AI gives us content. But when we get content that talks in our language and talks about our problems, talks about what I was worrying about last night, right? That's what you engage with. And then the other point you made there, which is really good as well, is that marketing is not a broadcast.
Mm-hmm.
Marketing is a two-way. And I think when we start thinking ABM and we think sales and marketing together rather than just marketing, we stop doing that. We stop broadcasting and we start drawing in and interacting. And interaction is the relationship bit, right?
Definitely. And I think it's not just sales and marketing, as we touched upon. You really need to bring in elements of product, customer success, leadership to an extent, because it's going to be changing the direction of the business in cases, you really can throw an existing proposition on its head. If it's not working and you know that it's not going to resonate with your accounts, well, AI can't tell you that. You need to have done your research. You need to be going out in the field, speaking not only internally, but externally, using third-party data providers to really then help decide your next move.
Yeah. Okay. So AI is going to help ABM, or in terms of be a great tool for us, but it's that principles of what we're trying to do that will make the difference.
AI is for insights, not execution.
Brilliant. Thank you. But on that killer note, I think we'll leave it there. Thanks so much, Rob, for coming and talking about ABM. It's a fascinating topic. I think we could talk for hours on this, and we can definitely have another podcast where we drill down onto specific areas. It really fits into what we've been talking about in terms of this sort of longer sales cycles, more complex sales cycles, more self-service. And definitely I feel every organization in the tech sector should be at least looking at ABM and what it can do to sort of engage with the changing buyers and the changing buying process. So thanks once again. So as I said, we're probably going to do another podcast on ABM. So if there's any specific areas you want us to drill down on further, then please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. You can reach us on podcast@cremarc.com. And likewise, we're planning the next episode of Generation Marketing. So if there's any specific areas you want us to cover, any topics, any controversial challenges you're facing and you want us to sort of explode and explore, then please, again, reach out to us on podcast@cremarc.com. Thank you. Thanks, Rob.
Good night.